Hi guys and welcome to KeebWorks. Today I'll be taking a look at the SteelSeries 7G and the Cherry MX Black switches. Let's get started. Now, I mentioned in my previous video that this is my all-time favorite old school keyboard, and for various reasons, but first let me give you a quick overview. This keyboard was designed to be the top end of SteelSeries' lineup. Back then, it would have cost you £105 or about £135 in today's money. That's a lot for any keyboard, considering back then, mechanical gaming keyboards weren't commonplace like they are now. And with such a high price tag, SteelSeries didn't sell as many as they would have liked. However, the keyboard did well enough to receive a revamped version named the 6G V2, which is essentially this keyboard but with cheaper and less features. Although that came with a 2-unit backspace, which this didn't. Now, as for the switches, this keyboard has the Cherry MX Black, which is quite uncommon to see in a gaming keyboard, especially in today's world. But there is a very good reason for that. The Cherry MX Red just came out when this keyboard was on the market, so SteelSeries couldn't really use them. Also, they were marketing this keyboard to be durable, and the MX Red being a new switch hasn't been tested yet, so they stuck with the MX Black, which at this point was already a reliable switch. You'll hear what I have to say about these switches later on. Now, moving on to the keyboard categories. In my usual bend test, the casing creaks a little more compared to both the 2010 and 2014 Black Widow, which surprised me. But it's still very well built and I doubt it will break from a single drop. The opposite is true with the keycaps. They are thin, cheap and pad printed. You can see that most of the keys have shine on them and it doesn't look very nice. Also, the keycaps have this weird white marking on the back, which you don't see while typing, but I figured I'd show it anyway. Perhaps you can tell me what they are. And since we're on the topic of the keycaps, some of them have become extremely loose. Let me demonstrate what I mean. So yeah, you might not want to repeatedly mash the keys, but you can always get new keycaps if you want. And hey, they're using cherry stabs instead of Costa ones. With that said, it gets a 7 out of 10. It has 6 media controls, 2 USB ports, a mic in, a headphone out, a thick braided cable, and N-key rollover. Yes, it has N-key rollover, but I'll get to that in a minute. The most interesting feature about this keyboard is the fact that it's using a big ass enter key with a 1-unit backspace key. This is interesting because a lot of older keyboards had this layout, but they sort of died around the mid-2000s. However, SteelSeries thought, hey, maybe people still like this, and they put it on this keyboard. Apart from the vintage layout, a few more things really stand out that makes this old school. Firstly, it doesn't have RGB lighting. To me, that's great because I don't really care, but I know some people really like that RGB. Secondly, it's using a PS2 plug instead of USB to power the keyboard, but it did come with a PS2 to USB adapter if you wanted to use that. Which leads me to my point earlier. The N-key rollover only works when plugged directly into a PS2 port. Otherwise, you only get 6-key rollover. And finally, it's missing flip-out feet. For some reason, they're nowhere to be found on this keyboard. I don't know why, but hey, at least you don't have to download a crappy keyboard software anymore. I'm happy to give this a 6 out of 10. Okay, so Cherry MX Blacks aren't for everyone, and there are many people who dislike the Switch. I, however, found them to be very decent switches. They haven't given me any trouble whatsoever, so I can't say I hate them. For the keyboard itself, all the ports work as they should, as well as the media controls. And one thing I should have mentioned previously is that you can access the media controls via the SteelSeries logo on the left. They've located the Windows key on the right, eliminating the need for a gaming lock function. Quite smart from SteelSeries. It's also worth noting that the 1-unit backspace key sucks, especially when you're so used to a 2-unit key. With that in mind, I can give this board an 8 out of 10. Very impressive. SteelSeries is known to make reliable keyboards, and this is no exception. Everything still works as they should. This is because it's a basic keyboard, and there's barely anything I can think of that would break or stop working. Firstly, there's no RGB LEDs that could burn out, and there isn't a keyboard software in the background that could potentially be outdated within a couple of years. So, it's simple and robust, which is what they were going for, and it worked, so good job SteelSeries. I'm proud to give this an 8 out of 10. This would be a very expensive keyboard for its price, but you can find them on the used market for less than £20 on a good day, and in some cases they can go for less. I got mine for £3.20. Yes, £3.20 for a mechanical keyboard with everything still working. Although mine was missing a couple of things like the converter, the stickers, the wrist rest, the manuals, and the box. Still, I think it's a great purchase, especially for how much I paid for it. I'm sure you can find deals on this board too. However, you may encounter the 6GV2 more often, which is the cheaper version of this keyboard. But essentially they're the same. And since it's a good value, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Now, moving on to the Switch categories. It's important to note that this is not the vintage black, so it's very scratchy and very rough. In fact, it's so bad, you can feel the scratchiness when pressing on center. So yes, it's even worse when pressed off center. It's honestly disappointing and I wish Cherry would do something about it. 3 out of 10. It's pretty good in terms of weighting. I like it and I find it comfortable to type on. I would like it if they made the spring towards the end a little bit heavier to encourage not bottoming out. Other than that, it's a good weighting, 7 out of 10. They sound quite muted on the 7G's chassis. And I don't think they quite sing with this board, but I do prefer the sound of this compared to some clicky switches out there. 5 out of 10. Now for the typing demo. Enjoy. It's a decent switch to type on. Obviously for me, the weighting is the biggest plus point. Everything else is eh. But if you really want to put the work into making this a good Switch, you should consider lubing them, because as stock Switches, they aren't really that good. Still, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. For the most part, it's not bad. Bear in mind that I only play for about 3 hours per session nowadays, so not very long. Still, I found the Switch to be very comfortable to game on, and the weighting didn't put me off at all. So all in all, it's a great Switch. However, you can really feel how scratchy the Switch is, especially when you're creeping forward in a stealth game. It's almost distracting actually. Still, it gets a 5 out of 10, but I don't recommend this Switch for gaming at all. So in conclusion, it's a very solid old school keyboard that is both reliable and durable, especially for the price. The switches are debatable, but if this is your first time shopping for a used mechanical keyboard, consider picking one of these up instead of the Chinese clone boards. The final score for the keyboard is 37 out of 50 or 74%, beating every single keyboard I've reviewed so far. The same cannot be said with the switches. The final score for the MX Black is 26 out of 50, just barely making it past the halfway point. Next week, I'll be reviewing another gaming keyboard, but with very strange switches. Until then, take care and goodbye.